ransomware is, and the recording is in progress now. So this will be available also as a recording on top of the Prezi. So again, this is something that I'm very passionate about. It's a great field. We get to help people, and Cyber Florida is a great organization. We'll cover kind of what they do if you guys aren't familiar, but they're a great organization. So first off, Scarlet Cybersecurity. Again, we're a division of the Scarlet Group, and we're a Florida-based IT and cybersecurity firm. We have locations along the East Coast, and we provide IT, cybersecurity consulting, and audits for industries of all size, really. Our focus is on small to mid organizations and local, state, federal, education, government. We are on the GSA contract for government entities. We perform highly adaptive cybersecurity services under that contract. So incident response, cyber hunt engagements, high value asset assessments, anything involving in-depth security, we do it. And we love assisting with compliance. A new thing lately is insurance compliance. That's been an issue for a lot of organizations. And really, we can help come in and answer those questionnaires and show you where your gaps might be, stuff like that. So again, scarletcybersecurity.com if you want more information. And now we're going to dive into the real heroes here, Cyber Florida. They're also known as the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, and they're an entity in the state of Florida that's trying to promote education, research, and outreach of security, trying to make Florida the best in the nation for cybersecurity. And we absolutely love working with them. They're a great team. They set up webinars like this all the time. So if you're not always checking their website at cyberflorida.org, should be. It's a great website. They have blogs, they have free resources for organizations, and they just try to help out from the very beginning levels of high school students trying to get into security all the way to state officers running a security division. They try to get a wide range of resources and information together. So check out their site at cyberflorida.org and just keep up to date with them. They're doing really cool things, and you're going to hear a lot about them, I'm sure. So this webinar, it's a bit more technical. So I wanted to just kind of give a quick background on where we got a lot of this information from. We have a lot of experience in security. Scarlet's been around for almost 20 years now, and we have hundreds of years of cumulative experience here in the security front. We have experience with local business directors, IT directors, clients of all industries, government entities. We've done incident response for major ransomware events, and we work with insurance, cyber insurance's forensic incident response teams as well to help remediate issues. So this is a very familiar territory for us. It's a exciting field, but it's like when you get work, it's exciting, but also kind of a bad thing, right? So we really try to emphasize prevention and detection over remediation. You do not want to get to the point of remediation, and this Prezi is going to really cover those topics and show ways you might have a gap to fill with security here. So on that note, we're going to just define ransomware real quick. I'm going to go through this a little quickly, but we do have this, so we're making sure we're all speaking the same language here and have the same vocabulary for the upcoming slides. So why is ransomware getting so much attention lately? First things first, we would need to cover what ransomware falls under, and that's malware, malicious software. This is software that does bad things, right? Malware is a very broad term. It's the high-level family that any sort of virus or ransomware falls under. And there's thousands of different types of different goals. We have some here as examples. They have strains as well. It creates a complex web of threats. That's what antivirus does conventionally, is it catalogs these threats with signatures. It associates a threat with a signature and blocks that. The problem is these evolve rapidly, and standard antivirus is having trouble keeping up nowadays. Some types that are of non-ransomware that can still cause issues. Spyware, I believe this is one of the first types of malware. It's just watches what you do, essentially. It can serve up ads. It can track activity for nefarious or legitimate purposes. I like to always joke that spyware kind of went away because they don't need it anymore. You're just downloading spyware with everything you do. So any social media, any legitimate software, any websites, usually collecting your data with your consent. So spyware is kind of was the first stage of that, but nowadays it's all legitimized and has user approval. So spyware, we don't consider a very large threat in our threat matrix. It's very low down on the list. Trojan is a type of malware delivery where they rely on deception to get in. This can be ransomware as well. We've seen Trojan horse ransomware attacks. Generally, it'll be something you're downloading that you think is something else. So it'll act like a program you need and install malware. Very common, probably the one you would run into in your everyday life would be a Trojan for a browser extension. You download software and it is the legitimate software, but part of that installer package gives you a malicious browser extension. And then from there, further threats can occur. So Trojans are, again, a very old form of malware. They just have been modernized and they're a delivery vehicle for malware. Remote access tool are also very important to cover. These, again, can lead to ransomware. They are all about access on the back end. So remote access tools can actually be installed via account compromise very often, especially if there's an outward facing RDP. We have a little, password tip here because that is a common vector is to get in and install backdoors. We're always going to recommend multi-factor and stuff like that. We'll get to that in the end slides here, but remote access tools are a big deal. They allow for a backdoor into servers, computers, networks, what have you. So again, this is just malware, high level overview, what we're kind of talking about here. And ransomware is a specific strain of malware. We call it, the big one, right? This is where everything kind of comes into play. All those previous spyware, rats, you have your backdoors, you have any and every attack method is going to be leveraged to try to get ransomware into a system, most likely. The reason is this is the most financially profitable one. Really, the main motivation behind most attacks we deal with is going to be financial. There's also espionage and cyber warfare, which may increase in the next few weeks and months here, but that is the main ransomware vector we've seen is to try to extract data for money or encrypt data for money. So what happens is this ransomware gets in via one of these methods, via phishing email, what have you, locks your data down, and then actually extracts your data now. And they perform what's called a double extortion attack, where they ask you to pay to unlock your data and to not release your data publicly. They have a website that anyone can go to. Most of these major actors do. And you can just download companies' data. So it creates a major, major data risk because you are exposed via the internet. And again, that's the newer trend. Previously, ransomware, way back in the early days, would spread via email, bad links. Some of the first strains were just simple executables in email before email security was even really a thing. Locks down your data, looks for your cloud stores, looks for your OneDrive, looks for anything it can, encrypts all that at the same time across the network, and then asks for payment via a little sticky note or via a message on your desktop or what have you. It evolved eventually into nation states, huge profits were being seen, billions a year lost in ransomware attacks. And this is a very malicious and nefarious attack. It dwells for months looking for all your shares, active people in your systems, trying to find where everything's stored. And then one step further than that is what's happening now, the double extortion attack, where they, on top of all this other stuff, while they're dwelling, they extract data and share it publicly. So this is the kind of final escalation of ransomware. There is something called triple extortion as well, where essentially it's even more. There's 3 avenues for them to get paid, but ransomware is generally paid via cryptocurrencies because they're untraceable, and the asks have been getting higher because people are paying. So this double extortion attack that I mentioned is a very, very, very effective method, because even if you had all your disaster recovery planning in place, this data exfiltration is very difficult to counter. So some methods that they're going to get in, the most common by far is phishing emails, but there's also some other avenues we've seen directly in our experience in the past few years here. Usually the groups can range from a single hacker, quote unquote, a single entity, to a nation state organization. The most common thing we're seeing a lot of now is what's called ransomware as a service. So just like your organization might use software as a service or infrastructure as a service, cloud services, ransomware is now available from major entities as something to basically rent out. They'll give you a custom strain, they'll give you a custom decryption key, they'll give you the backend you need to run your own ransomware campaign. They have it's the strangest thing in the world. They have customer support. They're a legitimate business for all intents and purposes. It's just they're criminal. So these ransomware as a service groups don't ever directly expose themselves. Generally, they just host all this stuff for other attackers and get paid that way. So that's been a very big issue, because now we have a scenario where you don't need an elite team of developers to create an attack. You just need people who understand how to use the service. These groups, again, they can be all the way up to nation states, right? And they'll target the industries most relevant to what their cause might be. And again, financial is the most common. So phishing emails are the big way to get in for most organizations. It's the lowest hanging fruit. It's by far the easiest for attackers to use. They just send a targeted email. They'll have a macro embedded file, or they'll have a fake login to a Word site. Users will click it. You'll either get a remote access tool downloaded, or you'll get a initial dropper downloaded on that device. If it gets past antivirus, then they have a backdoor into that machine. They'll use that backdoor to pivot further into the network, and they'll try to set up persistence throughout the entire network. The real threat you're going to face with phishing is going to be your users. It's pretty much the most important thing now, is creating the human firewall, as security organizations call it, where you have your users are all up to par on security standards and know what to expect. We're not naive. We know users will always click bad links, but we want in a culture where users click these links and then say, I'm not sure if I should have clicked that. I'm going to ask IT, or I'm going to ask security. We've been seeing that a lot lately too. It's been pretty, we're feeling pretty optimistic about that, because the users reporting this issue, I felt strange about that link, I don't know what I just did, is a huge boost for the security team, because we now have visibility into something that might have flown under our tools radar. So again, phishing is super common, and phishing is going to be the main cultural overhaul you're going to want to make within your organization. Do phishing training, do security awareness training, really try to prevent this low-hanging fruit from being accessible. A little more advanced than phishing, but common still, is exploits. So we're going to use an Exchange server as an example. So anyone listening, if you have an Exchange server facing the internet, take this to heart, please. There are exploits that hit servers exposed to the internet, or certain switches or certain firewalls, what have you. So attackers scan constantly. You're always getting hit by these scans 24/7, 365 for these vulnerable systems. It's essentially free for them to do. It's just information gathering. But say they find a vulnerable Exchange server running an old version of Windows. What they can do then is run this exploit. And if it gets through the defenses, which it most likely will, because it generally looks about like legitimate code, they'll run it on the server and create a backdoor. The remote access tool I mentioned, they'll create something like that on the server and leave it sitting for months. And so even if you're performing network baselines and software baselines and just ensuring that your systems are all what you expect them to be, this might go under the radar completely, because it has been there for months. So you don't have a way to really root this stuff out unless you know what you're looking for. And the attackers will then eventually, when they're launching a new attack, they'll sell this access. This ransomware as a service group might have set this up. They'll say, hey, we have 500 Exchange servers available, plus this new ransomware strain, plus this whole backend support and this website hosted to share all their data. Who wants to buy this attack? So you basically get to bid out an attack for these ransomware as a service groups. Exploits are very common. Like I said, you can you can find these anywhere and everywhere. These are going to be countered by patching primarily, and by making sure your perimeter is locked down as hard as it can be. Firewalls are good. Firewalls are good for, they're about the equivalent to closing your front door. They're good for keeping the really, really low-hanging stuff out. But again, you're going to need some more advanced network security solutions in place to detect and prevent these exploits. And we will get to that at the end of this presentation. Last and not least is, we're calling it the target attack. This is usually performed by an advanced persistent threat. This is where an organization or government entity is specifically targeted and engineered to fall victim to an attack. So ransomware authors, ransomware attackers always have a target industry or have a target type in mind. These specifically that we're talking about is a nation state group or a highly motivated criminal group targeting one or a couple organizations with a very specific exploiter campaign. They're going to go after, from top to bottom, try to get into this system and stay there for months doing all sorts of damage. These are very difficult to counter. These are kind of the, there's kind of the reason that you want to fly under the radar in some ways. Large organizations won't brag, quote unquote, about their security. They won't share their vendors. They try to keep very under the radar because these attacks are very likely to succeed in some capacity. There's recovery plans for it. There's stuff you can do after you get hit, and you do have a chance to detect it. But everything you detect, you're fighting a 24/7 team that is working exclusively to compromise you. So these are again very hard to counter, but there are ways to get around it. It's just you need to be prepared for it, and you need to make sure you have contingency planning in place for something like this. So again, the main three attacks you're going to see are phishing, exploits, and then a targeted advanced persistent threat. There are tons of other ways they can get in. Ransomware can be something as simple as downloading a Trojan, and the Trojan had ransomware in it. But phishing should be the primary takeaway for most organizations, ensuring their users act as a human firewall and ensuring their actual firewalls are configured correctly and have all the newest security licensing in place to help prevent these threats. So some horror stories, as we'll call them. Keep going down a pessimistic route, it feels like, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, I promise. We're going to go over the controls at the end here. We generally like to keep these a little vague. We had another example in here, but recent events made us remove that example. We don't want to talk about stuff this is something from a few years ago, but it's kind of relevant again today. So we removed that right before this presentation started. But we can dive into these. The first one is a pretty recent law firm attack, where it was a law firm for Fortune 500 organizations. And these are prime targets, right? The legal industry has a lot of valuable client data. And these double extortion attacks are now shifting more towards these high value data targets, because they realize, although they might have backup and disaster recovery planning, and they might have a way to recover from this ransomware event, their data is so valuable that once it's exfiltrated, they are almost forced to pay if they don't have if they don't have proper controls around that data. So there are a lot of very big attacks, very big. If you just type in law firm breach, you'll see a lot of them, but we're going to focus on a pretty recent one. The resources are here, but again, I'm not going to call it out directly by name, but this is all public information. They had to report the breach. So we'll dive into this. Oh wait, the name is here. We changed that because it's been a few months. That's right. So this is Campbell, Conroy, and O'Neill. This is an attack. They're a firm for the numerous Fortune 500s. They worked with Ford, Honda, GM, Boeing. It was a recent attack, and basically they had a lot of valuable client data, including financial data, in their systems, and they worked with these organizations as their legal team. But through this, they share a ton of information, including a lot of PII, personal identifiable information. So this attack was geared towards double extortion, because they knew this firm would be forced to pay the information to remove it from the internet. So on top of having all your data locked down, this happened last year. On top of having all your data locked down, you have a data breach. So these attackers strategically infiltrated this network, right? They went in, they looked at where all the data was, they looked at folder names, they understood the file structure by the end of it. This is after weeks or months, right? They knew their network, maybe better than a lot of users in that network knew it. And they knew what to lock and what to steal. And they knew that they were exfiltrating data from very wealthy individuals, people who could press charges, who would follow up with legal action. They're looking for information that can also lead to other attacks, right? If you get a lot of PII around very wealthy individuals, you can then leverage that information for further attacks against individuals like that. So it's a big deal. These kind of attacks, who you trust as a vendor is going to be inherently putting you at risk, putting your data at risk. The more you share with anyone, I know it's tax season right now, the more you share with tax organizations, you are trusting them with your data. And ransomware attackers know this, and they're starting to leverage this new type of double extortion attack to steal this data. Now, they don't generally care about the data too much. They might leverage this kind of data for these sensitive dossiers of like very high net worth individuals, but generally they just want to use the data to leverage a payment, right? They just want you to pay them to not release the data. It's almost a shame sort of thing. And they act like they're doing you a favor, which is very aggravating. They'll act like they performed a non-voluntary penetration test on your networks and ask you to pay them for their services. And they say, if you don't pay us, then we'll release all your data and you won't be able to get any of your data back. So it's a very malicious system, very effective system. And it's just something we wanted you to be aware of. This law firm had I'm sure, a great security posture, and they still were hit. The data they stole, again, executive profiles, system data, they're going to have a massive IT impact just by locking down these systems, right? Even if you have a plan in place, even if it's been tested, there is a lot of effort involved in an IT recovery engagement. So if you have your entire network taken offline, but you've stored all your data offsite, you have a hot site ready to go, and everything is just prepped up for this eventuality, it still will have an impact on your bottom line. Even if you don't pay the ransomware attackers at all, you're going to lose a pretty substantial sum just for covering this stuff. And again, the data itself is very valuable. There are fines associated with lots of data like this. For a short list of what may have been accessed here, we got it from one of our resources: names, date of birth, driver's license numbers, financial account information, direct financial account info, social security numbers, passport numbers, biometric data, online account logins. I mean, this is stuff that is disastrous to have leaked, right? This is, anyone would be in a very bad spot, but very high net worth individuals are having it leaked from their legal team is even worse. This is just kind of a worst case scenario that we want to cover again, because this data is very valuable and they were hit by a very dedicated group. So, the private data is already gone, systems are offline, press releases are threatened. That's their main thing, right? They're going to say, we're going to tell the press that you got compromised, and we're going to tell the press how valuable all this data is. And, you also need to stay online, right? So at the end, their damages were obviously financial. They lost a lot of operational income, and they lost a lot of trust with their customers. Internal confidence in their IT is going to be damaged after that. There'll probably, at the very least, a major shakeup in the way they do security. Focus, it's hard to focus. Work alone. Working is a special balance of, your time and energy. And when that gets disrupted by an attack like this, there's actually a lingering effect afterwards, where the entire output of the organization is reduced just due to lack of focus and lack of trust and lack of confidence in the IT structure, right? Again, workload's going to spike way up with something like this, and there's going to be a lot of recovery time. People are going to lose their weekends because they need to get the stuff they had to finish out. You're going to lose a lot of organizations as customers just flat out, they're just going to drop you because they have to report to their board of directors that they took action. So these kind of attacks are obviously very tragic. They're a net negative for society. No one wins here, and it's just something to be aware of, that even a large organization like this with very sensitive information can get hit if they haven't covered all their bases. And another one we just want to cover from a high level, another vertical for these attacks is healthcare. They are such a popular industry for attack because they have to be online 24/7. If you need constant availability and you're carrying a lot of EPHI, then it's going to be a very, very prime target for attackers. More than 1/3 of healthcare organizations in 2019, 2020 were hit by ransomware, which is a ridiculous number. 33%, right? 33% plus. They're very devastating because they directly impact patient care. They can actually lead to death, and the attackers know this, and they leverage that fact to get payment. They know that someone has to pay rapidly. HIPAA fines can also occur. This is a public database of every HIPAA breach. You can go look it up right now. We didn't include the link, but if you want to go look at HIPAA fines, you can see organizations that have been breached, exactly how many records were compromised, and see the fines associated with that. It can be substantial. So healthcare is a huge target for ransomware, and something to be very aware of if you're in that industry. Additionally, local government. So I don't know if we have any local government entities on this call today, but I want to go over very quickly some of the major attacks for the past couple of years. This is going to be focused sort of in the Southeast, but they're occurring every day across the US. First thing is Riviera Beach. This happened in June of 2019. Email, finance, website, and IT were hit, and the ransom was 65 Bitcoin, which at the time was about $600,000. And the aftermath was a $1 million overhaul of their IT. So just these numbers alone, right? You're looking at 2 million right off the bat, and then not including the damages, it's millions lost in an attack. Palm Beach, I'm sure a lot of you may have heard about this one. This hit their 911 system twice. The ransom was not paid, but the disaster recovery was a success. So this is a positive story. They got hit twice. They never had to pay. They had a disaster recovery in place, and they got to fight back, essentially, right? They got to hit back and come back online. It did impact services though. 911, just like healthcare, is a essential service that these attackers target due to that fact. Atlanta, this is a major attack in 2018. Utility, parking, court, etc. It took out pretty much the administrative capabilities of the city government. And it was a brute force attack, which means they tried 1,000 and thousands of logins and got into a system. After that, they pivoted throughout the system, did what they needed to do, locked down everything. It led to a 5-day outage, about $3 million in recovery services. That's the direct services engaged to recover, to be clear. They didn't pay the ransom, which is always good news. We've heard rumblings that it might be illegal to pay ransom soon, especially at a state level. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. We'll get more to that at the end again, but something to keep in mind is that this might be illegal soon anyway. But an audit had actually found them before the attack. They had performed an audit, and it said there were security gaps, and then sure enough, there were security gaps. So that leads to a pretty important point. Audits are going to give you a lot of what you need, audits and assessments, to get these changes pushed through, right? Atlanta had an audit, it looks like, and they had the gaps, known gaps, and they could have leveraged this to actually push for an emergency fund or a budgeting request for security, right? But this audit had previously found them to be vulnerable, and they did get hit. So examples like this are really good to keep close, because you know that this does happen. You get an audit, you have a gap, and that gap does end up come back and bite you. So this turned out to be Iranian hackers, Department of Justice. So it's technically at least a international attack, but I don't know if there was a nation state element to this attack. I don't believe there was. Baltimore, again, all servers of an essential services. It was called the Robin Hood ransomware. No, not the financial app. This is a ransomware strain. It was actually a pretty reasonable ransom, 13 Bitcoins. I hate to say reasonable with this, but the outage itself was really, really incredible. It was, multiple weeks out, and they moved $6 million from parks to cybersecurity response. So that's response, right? That's an upgrade, but also just paying for this incident. So if you want to talk about an impact, that will echo for years, right? The park systems lose $6 million due to this attack. And ironically, this was originally due to a low tech budget that led to this attack. They just didn't have the resources needed to defend an entity of this size. St. Lucie, again, sheriff's office, not paid, disaster recovery, single day lost data. Sheriff's offices, in both these examples, recovered without paying, and we love to see that. Greenville, 800 devices, the Robin Hood ransomware again. There's no confirmation there was a payment, but this was actually a really severe outage for a while. And 800 devices, no joke, that's a major ransomware event. So again, you can request this Prezi at the end of all this, and all of these attacks have links to their respective resources, so you can go review. We think it's really good just to read about these attacks and see what might have happened. What was the root cause? Like, what was the issue that led to these attacks being successful, and why did it take so long to recover? So I do recommend requesting this after. So how do we prevent all these attacks, right? We know what ransomware is. We know exactly what we're looking for. We know what double extortion ransomware is. We've seen that large organizations can get hit by this. What's going to be the primary method of preventing this, and how do we create a security-centric culture within any organization? So I think first things first, we need to cover is the 10 top things nowadays that we've seen that can help create a secure environment. And prevention is going to be number one, right? Preventing ransomware from even starting its process. You don't need to have any of these other plans in place. You don't need the in-depth recovery options. It's just what most people are going to think of right away. So antivirus, basic antivirus is going to be kind of the maybe below bare minimum standard at this point, but at the very least, the bare minimum of what most systems would be running to prevent ransomware. And so something we want to talk about with that is antivirus is only as good as the signature database it's using. Some of them do include behavioral engines that can detect suspicious behaviors, but you have an issue where most organizations don't have a centralized management of their antivirus. So you may have AV, but when we run cybersecurity audits, a lot of times what we find is that this antivirus isn't actually centralized. So we don't have a way to know if people are up to date, if people are even running it, if people are working remotely, what their status might be. So the first thing we like to emphasize before anything else on the prevention front is antivirus that has a central management system. You can add exclusions there. You can add new threat hashes. You can block stuff you've seen through a central portal and know it's pushed out to all your users. Now, better than that is endpoint detection and response solutions, or XDR. You'll see extended detection and response. It's a newer type of security solution that centralizes all your endpoints. So you roll it out on servers, you roll it out on workstations, you can even roll it out on mobile devices. It gets them all into one portal. And this portal has a robust detection engine generally. So you'll look up some products. So SentinelOne is one example. Microsoft Defender for endpoints is another one. But you see this single portal, single pane of glass, where your security team or your IT team, or if you outsource security, your outsourced team can track all this data. And they have a wealth of information. All these indicators are being collected, and it's blocking malicious activity just like antivirus. But on top of that, it's giving you in-depth cyber hunt capabilities. So your analyst teams can actually hunt down what might have caused that issue, what might have caused that bug, and go attack it at the core, right? Endpoint detection response is, for our organization, the minimum recommended endpoint security standard. We like to recommend organizations for endpoint security at the very least do an EDR with a managed detection response team on the back end, either internally or outsourced. On top of that, our real recommended prevention on endpoints is going to be EDR plus application whitelisting. So application whitelisting is where, instead of saying these apps are bad because we've added them to this big database in the cloud, instead we flip that on its head and say, okay, only the apps we know are good, only the hashes we know are good, are going to be allowed to run. We have seen that EDR plus application whitelisting has to be an incredibly successful combination, because your users can no longer just download Trojan horses, for example, that just executables from the internet and just run them. Backdoors, you're gonna have a lot of trouble getting hooked in, because EDR is going to be looking for fileless malware, things that are just running in RAM. It's going to be looking for suspicious installations, suspicious executables. Whitelisting is going to go past that and say, you're not even going to run any of this unless you have prior approval. Whitelisting is not infallible. It's not a comprehensive security solution on its own. But if you have whitelisting and EDR, you have the behavioral and signature-based and AI machine learning capabilities of the EDR, plus the whitelisting capabilities of just knowing what is good. This stuff's already been vetted. It's in a big database usually. And you know that this is a Microsoft file. You know this might be a official Adobe file, what have you. And anything that's not approved can't run. So this combination is very, very effective at preventing ransomware from running in the first place. The downside is going to be the administration, like I mentioned. That's why organizations generally outsource these services, is because they require specialized administration. They require a MDR team on the back end to really take a look and say, oh, this is a threat. Here's the remediation action we're going to take. Here's our verdict. And whitelisting, same sort of thing, right? Hey, this is okay to allow through. Here's our policy around this. But again, just pay attention to these new solutions. And if you need an immediate takeaway for your team, I know it's a very diverse group of attendees, but the most immediate action you can take is to just pay attention to what you download. If you don't have any sort of other thing that you can do here right away, like if the budget doesn't allow it, or you're going to have to go talk about EDR with someone, just pay attention to what you download. It's going to be the human firewall element. Just make sure you're not the one who leads to a breach can be a major takeaway. Second big tip is detecting the threat. So at Scarlet, we always advertise prevent, detect, respond. Prevention is going to be your first line defense, your tools that are trying to catch all this stuff coming in and sort it into what's good. Things will get through. Things always get through. Defense in depth is a practice that assumes things will get through one layer and another layer can catch it. The detection layer of things, detective controls, are critical, because what that can do is give you an alert to a anomalous activity that might not be associated with an attack exactly, but it doesn't match up with what should be happening. So an example we like to use is CPU usage. That can actually be a detective control, because if you see 10 to 15 of your devices that are all centralized spike in CPU usage, you know something unusual is going on. It might be an antivirus scan, but it also might be a program running. So if you set up a detective alert around that and have a team look into it, you may catch an attack in the very early stages that actually was able to get around your preventative controls. Another really popular control, and actually usually a compliance requirement for a lot of organizations anyway, is a security information and event management system, a SIEM. What this does is it takes all these, and I used to be a SIEM guy. This is one of my favorite tools in security, right? It takes all these valuable logs that are just sitting there on your devices. All these servers are always outputting all this information. Well, the SIEM takes all that information sitting on these servers just rotting away, and puts them into a cloud location, a central location where rules can then be run against all these logs and say, oh, wow, okay, this is an attack, right? We see on this domain controller, we're seeing this account fail 500 logins and then succeed in one. And then over here, we're seeing that same account create a new account called IT support 1, and it can link that kind of activity up and say, that looks suspicious. Can someone take a look at it? The people who take a look at it are usually in a security operations center or a SOC. So a lot of times what you'll hear is SIM SOC. That means you have a SIM feeding all these logs into one location. And the SOC, the security operations center, then looks at these alerts and these logs and says, oh, okay, this is bad activity. We need to alert someone else, or this is okay. This is a false positive. This is an admin doing their work that they're supposed to be doing. So SIMSOC is probably the most effective detective control from a network and account side of things. Again, EDR, it's in the name, endpoint detection and response. Really, it should be EPDR, endpoint prevention, detection and response, but not as catchy. Detection component is very similar to what I just described with SIM. EDR takes all these logs from all the endpoints and checks for specific indicators, behavioral indicators, and it'll actually tag these indicators and allow your SOC team or your managed detection and response team, those terms can be interchangeable. It'll allow that team to look into these events as well from a high level and just have a central source for all your logs. So SIM and EDR are compatible. Generally, what would happen if you had both of them is the EDR logs could be fed into the SIM as well. So you'd have a central platform to view all this stuff and create alerts on. On top of that, you're going to want to know if your data is compromised, right? So dark web scanning and assessments are key. You want to be checking that, constantly detecting if accounts have been compromised. A very common attack we see is a dark web compromise of credentials. So say you use single factor authentication on your Outlook or your Office, you'd have an issue where the dark web has these credentials and the attackers steal those credentials or buy them really, and then log into your Outlook or your online email, set up certain rules, and then from there forward off scam emails to other people or try to internally get someone to download something and then they have a way in. So just knowing that your accounts are breached can be a huge advantage because you can inform people to change their account names. So the immediate takeaway today, right, is if you see something, say something. That's a very common and effective detective control, right? If you see something fishy, if you download something weird, if you have a weird feeling about something your computer did, if it flashed for a second and looked like someone took control, let someone know. Other than that, though, look into a SIMSOC solution, look into EDR, and make sure you have some sort of dark web analysis going on. Make sure your accounts are safe. You're going to hear EDR a lot today, and that's because EDR is very effective at countering ransomware. Next thing is incident response planning. So we did the prevention, we did the detection. What about the response? Incident response is actually a very regimented process. There are tons of resources out there about what an IR plan might look like, but cyber incident response planning and cyber incident response plans are specifically geared around responding to malicious incidents on a network, right? So the attacker only has to get lucky once. We like to always say that because it kind of helps you realize you always have to get lucky. They only need to get lucky once. So you need to have a plan in place for when they do get lucky. Generally, we see either an internal incident response team or a pseudo team that's kind of on retainer. It's their secondary job is incident response. For mid-sized organizations, most smaller organizations and like local governments and stuff will use an outsourced incident response team on retainer, where they'll help set up their planning. They'll help say, this is exactly what we do in these scenarios and who we call, and this is how we scope the incident. This is how we contain the incident and eradicate it. It'll be a detailed plan, and there'll be an engagement scenario where this team gets engaged. And we like to see established guidance. This is going to be a requirement for a lot of compliance frameworks and a lot of cyber insurance, but you're going to want a actual policy or document somewhere that says, here's exactly what we do. And it's, from my perspective, I read a lot of policies. The incident response policy is it's a really good meeting point for technical plus administrative policy, right? It has technical stuff your team can do. So your IT team is going to really appreciate it. It'll say these steps need to be taken. The disaster recovery plan needs to be invoked here. We need to scope for these incidents doing this. But on top of that, it has administrative functions. So it'll let your executives know who they need to contact. It'll let you see your liability based on the data you might have. It'll give you a lot of information. So incident response planning is key to just help get rid of that overwhelmed feeling that you will experience when there's an attack. It gives you a way forward, and it gives you a much quicker route to recovery on top of everything else. So get familiar with your process. If you don't have a process, please consider planning one. At the very least, start with an assessment, which we'll get to. But an assessment can help you get an idea of where we even need to start for this stuff. Disaster recovery. So this is actually a little different than an incident response, and they can invoke each other in a way. But disaster recovery planning is actually about ensuring that you have rapid business operational recovery or rapid organizational recovery after any sort of incident, right? So we use the picture of a flood here. We're in Florida. I don't know if everyone on here is from Florida, but generally these hurricane scenarios where a data center gets wiped out, it does happen, not just can't happen, it does happen. There needs to be a contingency plan for that, right? And a ransomware event is the digital equivalent to a hurricane wiping out a data center, right? All your data is totally useless and locked down. So we just like to emphasize that backups are generally not enough anymore. EDR services will actually include device level hardened images that allow you to roll back to a known good state, which means if you get ransomware, you might be able to recover really quickly with EDR. But on top of that, really there needs to be a business continuity planning and disaster recovery assessment done to see where your organization is at for disaster recovery. And again, these are all going to be available after the slide, and I am keeping an eye out for questions. But disaster recovery, we think, is one of the most important elements past the prevent, detect, response stack, because without disaster recovery planning, you could be left in a situation where you have a defense in depth security system that lacks remediation capabilities. So I would say that disaster recovery is definitely something to look into for a lot of people here, even if you're not worried about ransomware, because severe weather can take out organizations, right? If your data can't be recovered, then you could be in a lot of trouble. So identify your local disasters and what you're most worried about. Perform a disaster recovery assessment if you need to, and be familiar with your planning, and make sure you have a very rapid response plan, because if people can't get paid, customers can't get paid, then it can lead to a lot of issues. Central management. So this is something we alluded to earlier. This is absolutely critical from an IT and a security perspective, and I hope everyone on here kind of takes this one to heart. You need to have a central system where you manage everything, pretty much regardless of your size. Unless you're doing a BYOD system or something like that, you really want to have a central management portal or tool or what have you that can actually check patch status, check the devices are healthy, check the devices are running your AB. This is different than EDR because this is administrative work and IT work generally. So we like to reference remote monitoring and management tools, RMMs. And those are tools where you have all your devices have an agent on them. This agent's reporting back to home base saying, hey, yep, we're running AV, we're running our EDR, we're running our whitelisting solution. Everything's healthy, we're patched and up to date. Your technicians can remote in whenever they need. So these tools are critical. You need to make sure you have complete visibility into the network. Whenever we perform an assessment, this is one of the core factors we look for, is central management capabilities, and if your organization's able to truly track your devices and assets. Defense in depth. I reference this. This is making sure you're protecting your endpoints, you're training your users, you have a risk map, you have a plan. You really want to have a detailed network map if you can, with like where you think your biggest threats are, or at least a hardware inventory where you categorize your risks. This is a overall concept where you need to force this ransomware attack that we've been discussing to breach several layers to even begin doing what it needs to do. So it needs to try to get past your EDR, your whitelisting, your human firewall if your user's not clicking links. It needs to get through your RMM system not detecting a spike in CPU usage. It needs to get past your SIM not detecting suspicious account activity. If you have all these layers, you have such a higher chance of detecting those before it gets worse. But if it does get worse, even part of this defense and death planning is a rapid incident response plan where you scope and contain that issue quickly. And you invoke disaster recovery, which you have planned out quickly. So this might sound like it's out of reach for organizations, especially smaller ones, but it really isn't, because your costs around security scale fairly linearly with your size, right? So if you're a small organization, these tools are very scalable to your size, right? So I would definitely look into all this that I've mentioned so far, because it's not out of reach like you might think. Staying current, this is part of central management. Just make sure you're reading the news, make sure you're keeping up to date on things, make sure you're keeping your stuff patched. Just set up a threat intelligence feed. Really, it could just be subscribing to any sort of, I'm not going to recommend one or the other here, but any sort of type cybersecurity news, you'll see a lot of them. Just read the news surrounding it, and you will find that a lot of your systems that you use, like an obscure app or something, is going to have a vulnerability that you didn't expect. You'll see it pop up in the news and just fly under the radar. Security audits is something, this is how we started as an organization. This is how the Scarlet Group started, is IT and security audits. This is where a third party comes in and performs an audit. They say, okay, here's where you could use some improvement. What it really does is helps give you a roadmap for the future. Using a third-party auditor as an IT team can help you be ammunition to go to the executives and say, hey, here's where we have gaps. This is due to these reasons. Here's my plan to move forward with this. Do you have approval? So you have your ammunition, right, to say this, we do have an issue. You provide a solution to that issue, or a proposed solution, and then it really helps enforce a healthier relationship, and it helps IT provide value to the business. So from an executive standpoint, an audit's going to be great just to get an idea of where you might also have gaps. These generally lead to a very friendly interaction between the IT security team and the executive staff, because it helps cement where there might be issues and confront those issues rather than confront the individual teams. Aggressive patching, I'm going to bring this up again. Patching is key. Make sure everything is up to date. Usually do this via central management. And the big question for ransomware and cyber insurance, when to pay. So sometimes an attack will make it through. And we always recommend organizations look into cyber insurance. This is a system that basically compensates you if there is an attack. They will have a set of requirements that they need you to meet to get the policy, but we do not ever want to see an organization get hit with absolutely no planning and no financial capability to recover. So something to look into. Engage your insurance if you do have it. A lot of organizations do. Engage it immediately. So we recommend never paying. I'm just going to say that now. I mean, they're criminals, right? But if you do need to pay, engage your insurance. They'll bring in a forensic team. If their team's successful, you're not going to have to pay. If the decryption key is available, if it's an old strain of ransomware, you're not going to have to pay. If you have disaster recovery and the data wasn't extracted and they found out no sensitive data was accessed, you're not probably going to need to pay. But if the data was critical and they exfiltrated your data, and there might be a scenario where they even recommend paying. There's going to be legal guidance with these insurance firms on what to do. We, again, never recommend paying, but there will be scenarios where you can land on paying based on insurance, on the guidance from lawyers or insurance. So just ensure that you have insurance and ensure you engage it immediately if you suspect an incident. Don't hesitate there. And that is all I had. So yeah, that is the 10 tips we had to creating a secure environment and creating a security-centric culture. Again, this is definitely available afterwards if you want to recover or review some of these tips. The keys are going to be incident prevention, detection, and response. Making sure you have a plan and a roadmap for the future. Make sure you have an idea of where you're currently at with an audit, and ensuring you have a disaster recovery plan as well. Again, severe weather is probably coming up in the next couple months here, and it's just something to always consider. So thank you for attending. We always love doing these at Cyber Florida. They're a great organization. Like I said, there's actually an outreach email for them. It's outreach@cyberflorida.org. You can just reach out if you have any questions, any concerns about your security. If you're with local government, state education, or you're with any size organization, they can give you resources you need to educate and to move forward on your security planning for 2022. And again, I'm Tyler Chansey. I'm with Scarlet Cybersecurity, and my email is tchansey@thsgcompany.com. And we are always happy to give these, and I hope you learned something. And if you need any of these slides afterwards, just shoot me an email. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Again, if anyone is interested in getting the slides or the presentation, just email us at outreach@cyberflorida.org and we'll get those to you as soon as possible. Thanks, Tyler, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks all. Thanks, Jenny. Bye, everyone.
Bye.